It was late, and I was driving home from my mom's house. I had been on the road for about 30 minutes, and I only saw 2 or 3 other cars so far. There were not many streetlights, and most of them were not very bright. On one side, there was a forest. On the other side was an empty field, and a new housing development in the distance. There were not a lot of people nearby. As I continued on my way, my tired eyes focused on the road ahead. I was a little too tired to be driving, to be honest. I probably should have stopped. Suddenly, something caught my attention. There was a person standing by the side of the road. It was strange, because there were no other cars around, and like I said, there was not much around there. It didn't make much sense to be out there. My headlights lit up the person, and he looked like he needed help. I was concerned, so I slowed my car. The person, who I could tell was a man, waved his hands, signaling for me to stop. It was a difficult decision to make. On one hand, I wanted to help, but on the other, it's not smart to let a stranger into your car, especially in the middle of the night when there's nobody else around. I got close enough to the man that he approached my car as if I was about to stop, but just then, I changed my mind and increased my speed. I could even see the disappointed look on his face. That's how close I was. As I was driving off, I looked in my rearview mirror. When I looked at the man, I noticed 2 other people walk out from the bushes. They started talking to the man as if they were friends. I was confused at first. I wondered why that person needed help if he had friends with him. I wondered why they were hiding. It didn't take long before I realized that it was a trap. Those men were hiding there, waiting for me to stop. I have no doubt that they were going to rob me, and probably steal my car too. When I reached home, I was pretty relieved. I was watching my rearview mirror the whole way, paranoid that I was being followed. That didn't seem to be the case though. The porch light was on as I pulled into my driveway, and I hurried inside, making sure to lock the doors. That night, I called the police and reported what happened. They sent an officer out to investigate, but I never heard back. I don't know if the guys were gone, or if they made up an excuse. It would have been impossible for me to prove that they were going to do something. At worst, they might have gotten a warning for hitchhiking. Anything more seems unlikely. In the end, the true intentions of those individuals remains unknown, but I'm sure it wasn't good. I like to help others when I can, but it's also important to be careful. I was a taxi driver back in the late 90s. I had to hustle pretty hard every night to make a living. One evening, I received a decent fare to take someone to a neighboring town. It seemed like a good opportunity to earn some extra cash, so I eagerly accepted. The passenger was quiet and polite, and the ride went fine, but things went wrong after I dropped him off. By that time, I was around 45 minutes away from home. There was a highway that I had to take to get back, and it was pretty empty at that time of night. It was around 11 p.m. As I made my way back on the quiet highway that connected our 2 towns, the late hour and the solitude worried me. The only company I had was the hum of my engine and the faint glow of my headlights cutting through the darkness. I hadn't seen a single car for miles. That is, until a rusted old vehicle suddenly appeared, careening towards me. The car swerved wildly, darting in and out of lanes with reckless abandon. It was a dangerous sight, and I knew I had to be cautious. I began to slow, preparing to pull over and avoid a collision, but something felt off. As the car drew closer, my instincts kicked in. The driver seemed to be hell-bent on causing chaos, showing no regard for their safety or mine. The only reason I didn't stop was because I thought the car would run me over if I did. I needed to keep moving in order to evade it. I swerved off the road, narrowly escaping the path of the oncoming vehicle. I watched the car speed past me, but I couldn't see the driver or if there were any passengers. I was in a shallow ditch on the side of the road. My car was fine, and I had no doubt I could get back onto the road. I looked back, and before the car disappeared, I tried to get the license plate, but there was none. I sat in my car for a minute or two and tried to calm down. The car was long gone by then. I was really confused because I was pretty sure that the car ran me off the road on purpose. I have no idea why. My best guess is that it was either a drunk driver or some stupid kid screwing around. It almost cost me my life though, and I didn't see the fun in it. I reported the incident to the police, hoping for some resolution or closure. However, as days turned into weeks, it became apparent that the case would remain unsolved. Like I said, there was no license plate, so what could I really do? I kept doing that same shift for a few years afterwards. Every once in a while, I see a car that looks like the one from that night. Part of me gets worried when I see it, but I haven't had anyone try that crap on me again, thankfully. My friends and I were caravanning home after a long weekend convention. We left late for a 7-hour drive back home. 3 of us were in a truck. I was in the passenger seat, Chris was driving, and Devin was in the back. Our friend Leon was following us in his own car. The last stretch of the highway home was pretty isolated. It went through beautiful state and national parks, along a few rivers, and lots of farmland. Not many people lived along that way, but the few houses were usually on ranches and farms. Small quaint towns and rural communities were few and far between. I love this particular drive. I've done it alone for years, always aware of how rural and desolate it can be. There's a reason that we were caravanning back home. On the way over to the convention, our friend Leon left on his own, way later than the 3 of us. He got a flat tire in the middle of nowhere, almost entirely out of cell service. He'd been stuck for hours in the middle of a hot day, trying to get service in the deserted hills. Without anything nearby, he'd have to walk uphill along a narrow highway to get service, sending SOS texts to his family. His calls kept dropping. Eventually AAA found him, but it was a miserable experience. The 3 of us delayed our own plans to leave immediately after the convention. We helped him get his spare tire replaced the morning we intended to leave. It was a longer delay than expected, but it was reassuring to not have to worry about anybody being stuck in the wilderness. Our departure started off normally. The roads were really windy, and we had to travel through more and more hills. We were still a couple hours away from home. It was close to midnight, give or take. Chris and I were talking quietly. Everyone was pretty tired after a long weekend of partying. Devin in the back of the truck had been asleep since the sun went down. The highway was very small, with many back and forth turns. We were winding around on steep cliffs, and on the other side, there were impressive drops into a rocky river. In the daytime, it was gorgeous. At night, it turned into an inky black with no illumination except your headlights. When the moon was out, the river was usually visible. There was very little lighting along the roads for hours on end. Rest stops were spaced out far, with limited service options. As I mentioned, cell service was very unreliable. I needed to stop and stretch, and I was trying to keep an eye out for a rest stop. There was one we were due to pass, but I couldn't remember the distance. Since the 2 of us who were still awake were getting groggy, I could only imagine that Leon felt the same. There were periodic campgrounds, but we'd hit a particularly lonely stretch. There was nothing off the road for a couple of hours here. This stretch can be busy in the daytime, but after midnight, it's lonesome. Miles back in one of the turnoffs, I had seen a car parked and pointed it out. Chris hadn't ever been on a long road trip like this before, so I was explaining to him that you can pull off if you need a break. The lone vehicle was miles away from anything, quiet and empty on a dusty stretch of gravel. We changed subjects and drove along for several miles. It was slow going. The truck was curling around sharp turns and rock wall hugging bends. We were a bit loopy from being up so late, but joking around and laughing as he drove with caution, but not too slow. Leon was trailing us farther back. Chris would sometimes slow down even more, just to make sure he was still following us all right. With everything so dark, it was easy to get tired and bored with all the twists and turns. I was hoping to check in with him at the rest stop, to make sure we didn't need to stop and nap. All of a sudden, I came around a turn, and I saw a guy hiking along the shoulder on my side of the road. I don't remember what we had been talking about, but I yelped and cursed. Thankfully, Chris saw the man too, and he was also startled. He was very responsible, blurting something in surprise, but slowing down to take the turn even more carefully. The stranger looked pretty haggard. He was wearing all black clothing, moving in a quick, jerky pace. It made his intrusion seem even more sudden, as if he leapt out of nowhere. I'm no stranger to seeing hopeful hitchhikers in my travels, but this was pretty wild. The man was wiry, turning to either smile or snarl at us. Hard to tell in the few seconds as we rolled by. Even though we didn't want an accident, we were just freaked out and had absolutely no interest in stopping. The guy didn't even seem to care, not trying to wave us down. He just sauntered by, as if annoyed by the headlights and the intrusion. He would have fit in perfectly at one of the rare shabby roadside bars or tiny gas stations. It was just the fact that he was all alone, power walking in the dead of night, so far away from any other signs of life. Panicked, I looked to see if Leon's car was still behind us. To my terror, it looked like he was slowing down to stop around that turn. I felt a stab of panic that he might be trying to check on the man. Under most any other circumstances, that might not have been a terrible idea to at least ask if someone wanted us to call for assistance. Out here, there was barely any shoulder, and the road was hazardous. It wouldn't have even been much of a traffic risk to stop quickly, since we hadn't seen any other cars in a long time. But given the isolation, casual trekking in such an unsafe place, so long past dark, there was no way that you could convince me to stop, even if there had been space to pull over. Leon kept moving. He simply slowed down for safety on the light curve. I assumed he had also been avoiding the risk of running into the apparition. Hitting somebody walking alongside the road was a serious risk, even in the clear daylight. At night with all the dark clothing, it was almost impossible to see anything out of close range. Chris and I were wondering why anyone would be out there so late at night. It wasn't the kind of place that you would be without a car, and we hadn't seen any campground signs. I thought that maybe the car that we had seen parked so far back was his. We wondered if maybe another car had simply kicked him out after a dispute of some kind. It was quite a mystery, and certainly a creepy one. We didn't wake up Devin, but we agreed to ask Leon what he thought when we stopped together. My leg was hurting, and I was eager to stretch out. I now had a lot of nervous energy to burn off. In spite of that, I was grateful that the main stop was miles away. It unnerved me to think of meeting that guy again. A few of the towns that we'd driven through were known for bad drug problems. I had recently read a book about a very old, but very disturbing murder case, out in an even more isolated place near this route. Though it was really unlikely to have any real issues, just knowing we had several miles between us and that creepy dude was reassuring. A wash of relief came over me as I realized that we were finally at our stop. A break sounded pretty great. We woke Devin up and all used the restroom, or walked around for a few minutes to get out various cramps. I joked at Leon before we loaded back up, saying I was relieved he didn't feel like picking up a passenger for the rest of the trip. He looked at me confused. I pointed out that it looked as though he was going to be stopping for the man in black. It looked like the random stranger might have been able to open one of his doors. He'd been going so slow around that turn, the man was nearly keeping pace with his car as he passed. Leon asked what I was talking about. Chris and I looked at him, wondering if he was messing with us. Leon reassured us that he was quite serious, just tired. Maybe also a bit dazed by the road. We launched in and told him about the walker. All four of us continued to question what the heck anyone was doing out there so late. Leon hadn't seen the stranger at all, which made it even creepier. We both knew we had seen the guy, and we just assumed that he must have too. Perhaps the fact that the strange man was on the passenger side of the road made me notice and point him out. If Chris had been alone, then maybe he'd also have overlooked him. Devin obviously had been sleeping, but knowing we were the only ones who noticed the man freaked us out a bit more. While I'm extraordinarily glad that nothing else happened, it's a bit unsettling to think that only two of us saw anything at all. This happened just last month. I was driving home after a late shift at work. It was well past midnight according to the clock on my dashboard. It was about a 45-minute drive for me, through mostly urban roads. There was no highway that really made sense to take, so it was a pretty slow drive. Kind of relaxing, actually. I don't mind taking it slow. Eventually, I found myself on a deserted street in a rough neighborhood. I knew that area because one of my friends lived there at the time. The place was known for crime. Robberies were common there, so it was important to be careful. Suddenly, something caught my attention. A woman stood in the road, a few hundred feet away from me. Her whole body was seemingly covered in blood. She was frantically waving her arms, begging me to stop, it seemed. My heart raced with concern and curiosity. I slowed down my car, cautiously approaching her. I rolled down the window, and the woman quickly approached, her desperate eyes looking into my window. She pleaded for me to open the door, her voice filled with fear and urgency. Something inside me hesitated, though, a gut feeling that warned me to be cautious. I chose to keep my door locked and the window slightly open, ensuring there was a barrier between us. I asked her what happened, but she didn't give me any answers. Her pleas grew more desperate, her hands were trembling. I wanted to help, but I couldn't let a stranger into my car in the middle of the night. I promised to call the police, but I kept the car moving. I was gone before I could see her response. A few seconds later, I looked in my rearview mirror, and I saw the woman walking off the road. Her movements seemed more calm. She was acting normal. I slowed my car to get a better look. I got the feeling that it was all an act. As soon as I was gone, she dropped it. I'm pretty sure it was some kind of trap, but I can't be sure. If I opened my door, I think I probably would have been robbed, or worse. I started my car again and continued driving. The reality of the situation sunk in. As I drew further away from the scene, the dark neighborhood slowly transformed into more familiar surroundings. The city lights shone brighter. When I got home, I parked my car and took a deep breath. I pulled out my phone and called the police like I said I would. I told them there was a woman in distress, but I thought it might have been a trick. I was told that they would check it out. As soon as I got into my bedroom, I opened my laptop and Googled the scam on the internet for a while. Seems like it's a fairly common one. I'm pretty sure that's what happened to me.